against each other over rulers that don't like you. Prefer us trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly. Suggestions that obliterate to camouflage the folly. Attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily. The pomposity, this mockery, and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the Akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. I had an intro to give you, but my guest is not here. This is the problem with the live show, is that sometimes people have shit happen or whatever, and they don't show up, and then you don't have them. Frank is here! Yay!
Yeah. Hey!
Hi, Frank. We're already live.
Oh, are you? Okay.
Yes. How's it going?
Jolly good.
Excellent. I'm going to go back and then redo my intro so I can introduce you.
Sounds great.
Excellent. All right, then. Well, tonight I have a very special guest who has gone where most of us have not and could never, and has explored aspects of the most secretive organizations, agendas, and architectural wonders that exist. And we get to pick his brain about all of those mysteries and rabbit holes. Friends, I'd love to welcome to Rogueways the author of The Hermetic Code, Unlocking Manitoba's Greatest Secret, and Astana, Architecture, Myth, and Destiny, Frank Albo. Frank, welcome to Rogueways.
Lovely to be with you during these dire times, so let's get into it.
Yes. Very, very dire seeming. And I just want to mention to people before we start that I have this promotion going where you can win these beautiful flower coasters. It's a set of 5. It's a $50 value, and you can be entered to win this if you go subscribe to subscribestar.com/rogue-ways. And at any level, there's even a $1 subscription level, so that still enters you to win. If you're already a subscriber, thank you so much. If you would like to enter, then you just share that Subscribestar page somewhere on social media for others to find, and then that enters you to win as well. And also go check out my site, rogueways.org, if you would like to look into tarot readings or classes or various other things that I have going on and see more about that. And otherwise, I have a pointless question of the episode for you, Frank, and I was wondering what your favorite shape is and why.
Oh my gosh. I would say the triangle for various reasons. It is the essential part of understanding the first proposition of Euclid's Elements, which, as I see it, the most important work ever conceived, written, or imagined. And it was essential in the formation of all other geometric forms that were used in Gothic cathedrals.
Wow. So what is Euclid's first proposition?
Is that from an equilateral triangle, or how to create a straight line from two interlocking, how to use an equilateral triangle to create two interlocking circles. Or I believe it's the other way around. Two interlocking circles can create an equilateral triangle. And that, of course, that shape of two interlocking circles is known as the vesica piscis. Yeah. So right in Euclid's first proposition, he lays out the foundation of perhaps the most important form, geometrically speaking, in medieval Catholic liturgy and form.
Wow. And then, of course, the simple aspect of it is that it sort of encodes the Trinity, which is underlies all of creation. There you go.
Yeah, that is certainly part of it. And also, if you look at the very famous fresco in the Vatican Loggia called the School of Athens, and in the School of Athens there are 4 panels, and the one that I'd like to draw your listeners' attention to is the one done by Raphael, which features Plato pointing to the heavens, holding the Timaeus, his work on creation, and then his pupil Aristotle holding, I believe, the Book of Ethics, pointing down to earth. And it was, of course, the great Hellenistic battle that the father of which we're all footnotes in philosophy, Plato, is pointing to this in permanent realm of forms up in heaven. And Aristotle, his exceptionally bright pupil, says, oh no, great master, it is down here on earth. We need to be concerned with the laws of physics, biology, philology. And therein, that work featured in the far right hand corner from Plato's perspective is a mysterious individual. And that is, of course, Pythagoras. And there Pythagoras has a muse right over his head, and many other people cribbing from his notes, whatever he's meticulously inscribing. And what the muse is holding is known as the tetraxis. And it's a series of dots that from 2 produce 3, and from 3 produce 4, which is the center piece of all mystical numerology that makes its way into Kabbalah. And therein is also the triangle. So that was my very long-winded answer of saying why the triangle is so moving to me.
Wow. That's a beautiful answer for why the triangle is so moving to you. That in itself could be a whole episode that we explore those aspects of the triangle.
Oh, yeah. Bring that one on, for sure.
That's awesome. I don't know that I'm quite prepared for that, although I would love to hear more of your understandings of those things. I was just going to go with circle, because the circle seems to, it was just Pi Day, so there's one reason. Mm-hmm. And the circle seems to enclose a lot of mysteries and structures itself and be sort of foundational to everything. And I feel like it's both like impossible in nature, but also everywhere in nature. And so I like that sort of paradox as well.
Oh yeah, as a shape goes, it is even from the period of the pre-Socratic philosophers of the 6th century BCE. The circle is, of course, the perfect form. All of nature revolves purportedly around such a form, which, as you rightly put it, it is seemingly impossible, and yet it is the lowest order object. And the other reason I'm quite fond of the triangle, not to go on a triangle fetish thing here, but it is when you take the triangle, obviously 2-dimensionally, into its 3rd-dimensional form, it is the lowest order Platonic solid known as the tetragrammaton, or the, not the tetragrammaton, that's the 4-letter name of God. It is called the tetrahedron, a 4-sided object with 4 triangles. And as Plato announced, this was the basis by which all other forms emerge.
The tetrahedron?
Yes.
Interesting. So that's this like pyramidal 4-sided sort of, okay.
Yeah, it's the lowest order 3-dimensional object in which all sides are identical, the faces, that is.
And what do you, since we're on the subject of geometry, just suddenly, what do you think about the, oh man, I'm forgetting the name, the cube, the hyperspatial cube? Do you know what I'm talking about?
The dodecahedron?
No, it's like a...
It's another Platonic solid?
No, well, I don't think so. It's the... What's it called? Maybe it says it here. Nope. Man, okay, if I think about it, I'll say it. I have one on the screen that that the people watching can see, but that you can't see. But it's a cube that tesseract. It's a tesseract.
Yeah. That, well, there you have it. I mean, I would invite all of your listeners to a great Carl Sagan piece, which actually concludes with, I believe, the tesseract, which is, of course, a 4th-dimensional cube. The idea is, and you have to put this up for people to watch. It's Carl Sagan. It's a rather dated piece on the 4th dimension, I believe, and it looks pretty psychedelic. But the content is it's brilliant. He begins with a line extended makes a form extended makes a 3-dimensional object like a cube, and then what happens after that is the work of early 20th century, late 19th century work that describes the 4th dimension in the most beautiful way. It's called Flatland.
Oh yeah.
So look at Carl Sagan's work on the 4th dimension there, and that to me is just a beautiful summation of Plato's cave. Not to go on and on about Plato, my great love, but Plato's cave is another way of describing this very notion that there is a hyperspace, not just three-dimensional space and one dimension of time, which Einstein duly noted, but a fourth spatial dimension. And this fourth spatial dimension, of which the tesseract exists, and what that means is that if you look at a square is really just the shadow projection of a cube. Now, is there a possibility that the cube is just a shadow projection, a flat shadow projection of a higher level object? And that, of course, is the tesseract. Salvador Dali does a wonderful piece called The Crucifixion of St. John, which shows Christ being crucified on a tesseract for any surrealist lovers. But the notion is that our entire three dimensions of space we're so familiar with is actually potentially a shadow projection of a higher fourth dimension. Now, how would that look? What would that look like? And so Plato, in my estimation, describes this vividly in his allegory of the cave.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, where the prisoner is caught in a cave and he can only see his shadow, and there are moving objects behind him because there's a light source behind him, and all the blinded by this point prisoners in the cave can only see the shadows right across from them of obviously higher dimensional objects behind them, three-dimensional objects behind them. And it's, for whatever reason, one of them gets removed from the cave and actually gets to see what everything is from on high, and tries to return back to the other incarcerated slaves and explains to them that they're only seeing everything in shadow, that the world that we're familiar with is really a shadow projection, at least in Plato's concerns, of a higher dimensional realm of forms. And to think that a 4th century philosopher with what we would describe as rudimentary knowledge of physics and mathematics could have so beautifully and allegorically described what the higher dimensions were like, Plato is our man.
Yeah. Yeah, what an amazing mind he must have had. I love his conception of it. Is his conception of the ideal the same as the dimension that he's describing then in that?
Well, yeah, I mean,
Okay.
that's it's well stated, because Plato always appeals to geometry when describing these higher dimensional realms. The 5 Platonic solids, for instance, are shadow projections of earth, air, water, fire, ether, and essentially, yeah, that's a realm of ideals. But the notion is that there's a mathematical purism behind it all, which undergirds all of creation. We just don't see it. We're always just seeing everything in shadow.
Wow. It makes me wonder if, there's this idea that in meditation you can experience this sort of aspect of yourself that is sort of like behind yourself almost, and like larger than yourself, and that it's sort of like watching you from a detached distance, like, and that's like your true actual self, but this part of you is just this like, almost like that, like this sort of like shadow of you and this sort of like less substantial form of you, but you're like not even really aware of it here. And it sort of reminds me of this whole allegory of the cave, and that even we would be then like a shadow of something from that realm. Yeah,
absolutely. It just rings true to me.
Yeah.
I think there's this effort to try to verify these realms through scientific praxis, but at another level, we have a tremendous spark of intuition, which has its own realm of reasoning. And sometimes when you come upon a work or a parable or a phrase, and it just rings true, I think there's something to be said about that.
Agreed. And I would encourage everyone to keep meditating in a practice so that they can experience that, because I think it's one of the most liberating experiences that a person can have. Perhaps I could be wrong, but Well, this is a fascinating way that the conversation has sort of veered that I didn't necessarily plan, that I love. But I do want to give people sort of an idea of who you are and where you came from. So if you want to tell us sort of what early life was like for Frank, and sort of, how you got to where you are, that would be fun to hear about.
Okay, so what happened was a curious glance at a sphinx on the roof of a local building in Manitoba changed my life forever.
Wow.
Is pretty much that's how it started.
Isn't that fascinating in itself? Because the Sphinx is supposed to be this like mysterious, like, and in the Sphinx's eyes is supposed to be sort of the all of the universe if you can stand seeing it or something. So you like experience that in real life. Uh-oh, we lost your audio somehow. Oh no. I wonder what happened. You're not muted. You may have muted. No, it would show if you were muted. Well, while we're waiting to see if we can get the audio back, I'm going to say hi to the people in the chat. I'm going to give a huge thank you to Trey and Jason for your super chats. Thank you so much. That is greatly appreciated. Warms a girl's heart. So I'm going to say, what's up, Steve Mercer? What's up, Lacey? What's up, Kevin? Yes. Oh, you're back.
Okay, there you are.
Yay.
It seems the Sphinx doesn't want it known.
Yeah, sorry, Sphinx. I'll stop.
No. All good. So what? I guess my foray into this subject began by sheer accident. Maybe, I guess, about 20 years ago. I just spotted these two recumbent Egyptian sphinxes on the roof of the Manitoba Legislative Building in Winnipeg. And I simply pulled up my car, looked up, and tried to answer the riddle of the Sphinx. That's basically how it started for me. I thought, I've never seen that before. I've lived in Winnipeg. I was undergoing my undergraduate degree in religion and anthropology. And that, it was like a siren, as it were, in the classical sense, just calling out to me saying, look at me. And it led me to do a very exhaustive investigation on this one building, which I later found to be the masterwork of an ingenious British architect and Freemason named Frank Worthington Simon. And he spent his life in the recovery of what he called the lost principles of ancient architecture. It's a building that is widely known in Canada. I don't know where actually you're from. Are you Canadian?
No, I'm in the U.S. I'm in Colorado right now, but I grew up mostly in Washington State. So.
Okay. Yeah. So, well, you've got some fine architecture in both states.
True.
Yeah. So to me, it was a familiar building. It is the state legislative building, but I hadn't paid any notice to any of these features. And what the Sphinx opened up for me was that there was a rabbit hole of mysteries contained therein. So after about almost 10-year study and 3 graduate degrees, I realized that the architect chose this building to conceal a life work on the mysteries of architecture, Freemasonry, and something I later came to appreciate as the Western mystery tradition, or the tradition attributed to Hermes Trismegistus,
yes,
known as the Hermeticism. And there on the dome of the building is this beautiful glistening golden boy, which happened to be the Greek god Hermes. So throughout the building, it's replete with the most bizarre things that you never otherwise notice unless somebody had pointed it out to you. You walk into the center part of the building, and there is a room with these 2 bison, which is exactly 66.6 feet in width and 66.6 feet in length.
Huh.
The numbers, geometry, Freemasonry, and Hermeticism are throughout the building, and that just changed the whole course of my academic study. I was looking at early Christian origins as an undergraduate, and I'd moved on to the University of Toronto, where I was studying ancient Near Eastern languages. And at that time, it was just after 9/11, and I was handpicked by my department to do a full ride scholarship at, it was either Columbia or Yale,
Wow.
to study Arabic and basically help in this crusade to understand what is at the heart of this vehement anti-American sentiment coming from the Arab world. Is there something in the Arabic tradition from a religious point of view that that could be found? And even though it was a great opportunity to do such a thing, I ended up turning down that offer to study architecture. I think my printer is going, so my apologies there. And so I went from architecture to, hold on, I'm going to find out what's going on there.
Now the Sphinx is mad that we're not talking about it anymore.
Yeah, maybe this. Yeah, good point. So that was it. I went from curious glance, spotting these sphinxes, to then looking at architecture in general and esotericism in architecture, which led to my PhD in Freemasonry at the University of Cambridge.
Wow. So you really understand on a deep level Freemasonry, but are you a Freemason, or is this just something that you've studied and taken an interest in?
Well, for the first 5 years, I was exploring as an outsider, and my undergraduate degree was in anthropology, actually. And so there's a term in cultural anthropology called being a participant observer.
Yes.
That is that you've been given you know how to observe a culture from the outside. You participate with the culture, you eat its food, you learn its language, but you remain dispassionate such that you're able to give an objective view of the culture's traditions. And what I found out is that no one had actually done that with Freemasonry. That was tried to take a purely anthropological approach.
Interesting.
So I did join the fraternity. I'm a terrible Mason because I just went purely to understand what it might have looked like to build a building, being an architect and a Freemason. And I wanted to see architecture through the eyes of a tradition that reifies architecture. Yeah. And I also had another reason for joining, which was access to Masonic archives. They're otherwise verboten to the uninitiated or the Cowan. And I felt like if I'm going to explore this deep well of knowledge, that at least wanted to look at Masonic archives. But so it was purely academic that I joined, and in that sense, I only went through what's called the first 3 grades. There are technically many more, but I went through the first 3 grades because I wanted to see and understand how this architect built the building as he was the Grand Master of all English Freemasonry for the period he was alive. And I'm glad that I did, because there are elements of the initiation that I realized were being projected in 3-dimensional forms and buildings that I never would have otherwise noticed had I not gone through that degree. I'll give you one example. My doctoral thesis was on the British Gothic Freemasonry and the British Gothic Revival. It sounds like a mouthful, but it was the idea that throughout the 19th century, the Gothic Revival is that medieval form of architecture that we would see in the House of Parliament in Great Britain. It is not real medieval architecture. It is a neo form of medieval architecture, but it became all the rage in the 19th century. The French, the British, the Germans were all claiming that they had invented this medieval form of architecture. What I discussed in my thesis and believe to have discovered is that the reason behind all of this was because there was the belief that the medieval Freemasons were the ones that invented this tradition from a secret body of knowledge, And each of these cultures wanted to claim a kind of sense of primacy of owning them. So the leading architects of their day in the 19th century, both in in Germany, France, and definitely in Great Britain, were doing exhaustive work on medieval architecture, trying to understand what were the fundamental qualities behind medieval architecture, what were these so-called Masonic mysteries. And one of them, long-winded professorial, how does this relate to the question, is the architect William Burgess. And he built a great cathedral in Ireland, which is full, like chock full of Masonic allegories. And you would never, ever otherwise notice it. In fact, for about 200 years, no one ever did, until I started looking at the building and realizing from the cathedral strong room and having access to the drawings that the architect employed the 3 biblical buildings that are deeply entrenched in Masonic ritual, and he used them as a template for designing the length of the building, the height of the building, and the exact location of the altar. And for 200 years, the best historians in the world in Great Britain that had been looking at this building had completely overlooked that element to the design. And I think had I not actually gone through the grades, I would not have seen some of the references that William Burgess had included in that cathedral.
Wow, it's a beautiful cathedral. I have it on the screen here for people to look at.
Yeah, now, as you're on this subject, let's look at that more carefully. William Burgess designed every aspect of the cathedral. It is his masterwork of cathedral architecture, medieval architecture. And in that sense, what he did was all of the sculptures are about 1,200 to 1,500 individual pieces of sculpture. He had his hand in designing each one of them.
Wow.
William Burgess was not only just a low-level, a low-level Freemason. He was deeply entrenched in this belief that architecture, among all disciplines known to the human mind, had the capacity of reforming the soul. So he took the idea that architecture is a way of building heaven on earth. It was the very way that God is always depicted as an architect in medieval times and before that. So the idea that he was an architect and wanting to imbue this building with these ideas went to every levels. Now, one of those works of sculpture is above the north transept. I don't know if you can find it, but if you might Google Cork Cathedral or Cathedral of St. Finbar, north transept, and there is a beautiful scene. And what it features is the angel of Revelation presenting a measuring rod to St. John of Patmos, the author of the book of Revelation, the last book of the Bible. And he passes this rod to him, and there it is on the north transept. And for me, that just stuck out as a sore thumb. There's 1,500 individual works of sculpture, but that one, I was like, it is classical. William Burgess would always use what he called the dodge, which was a little kind of red herring that he would include in a work, or a suggestive clue in the work, which would be the leitmotif of the entire work. It's kind of like if you watch a Scorsese movie and he uses light and shadow, and better yet, you've ever seen the movie The Sixth Sense, and every time you see the color red, you know that there are ghosts in the room. This is classic William Burgess. He would include a little dodge, a little symbol, and it was his way of saying, if you paid attention to that, you would see it's the leitmotif of the work. So on a hunch, pure intuition, looking at that transept, I said, that is completely out of place. What is that scene all about? Well, we know from the book of Revelation, this is the moment where at the end of days, the end of time, Armageddon, the angel of Revelation brings to St. John a rod that lets him know what are the dimensions to the return of the heavenly Jerusalem. So there I am looking at this, and it was with a parishioner who had been going to the cathedral for 50 years. And I said, if we could only find out what the length of that rod is, maybe this would allow us to understand the whole cathedral. So sure enough, we end up measuring it, and it ended up being exactly 18 inches. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh my gosh, 18 inches. Why is that so important? Well, I'll tell you. It's a royal cubit. Now, if you understand what a cubit is, it's a form of measurement that was used in medieval world, in the ancient world, and it's a standard form of measurement used for temples and sacred buildings.
Wow.
So, here's the best part. That one little dodge on the north transept, which shows a measuring rod of exactly 18 inches, if you apply that unit of measurement to the cathedral, something totally magical comes to life.
Wow.
For one, the entire footprint of the cathedral turns out to be exactly 50 cubits in width and 100 cubits in length, which, of course, can only refer to one building in the whole of the Western Christendom and the Abrahamic faiths, and that is the Tabernacle of Moses. We're told in the book of the Bible that the Tabernacle of Moses is exactly 50 cubits by 100 cubits. William Burgess decides to make that the plan of the cathedral.
Wow.
The second thing he does is he has if you apply that same unit of measurement, 18 inches, royal cubit, to the interior length of the nave, it turns out to exactly demarcate 20 cubits by 60 cubits. And I know what you're thinking. Why is 20 cubits by 60 cubits important? Well, that turns out to be the exact dimensions of the Temple of Solomon, the greatest temple ever built that was destroyed in 586 by the Babylonians, which is the central work by which all Freemasons claim to have their allegiance. That something occurred at that time. God was given instructions of building the temple. The only time that God designed anything to a great degree of accuracy was the Temple of Solomon. Unfortunately destroyed by the Babylonians. The word of God, called the Tetragrammaton, the holy name of God, Yahweh, lost forever. And ever since, we've been wailing of this lost ideal of Solomon's temple. William Burgess uses the dimensions of the temple to outline the exact location of where the altar should be in his cathedral. Now, the third dimension is the height of there are 3 spires at St. Finbar, and the highest spire, it's totally out of place. If you have 3 spires, they should have all the same length. But oh no, the spire that is directly above the altar is exactly 144 cubits. And 144 cubits is the dimensions, that 12 by 12, by the way, the dimensions in the book of Revelation that we are told is the height of the New Jerusalem, the heavenly Jerusalem that would land on earth, changing all of humanity forevermore. So there in this one cathedral for 200 years, no one ever noticed that William Burgess included the Tabernacle of Moses, the Temple of Solomon, and the height of the heavenly Jerusalem in a building, all of which I gleaned from one single statuary group.
Wow.
Above the north transept. So how much more is life like that too? Where you spot one little thing and it takes you down a rabbit hole. Architects, very, very good architects, do it all the time. And that's what, just like that Sphinx, if there's something out of place, some anomaly, I would say explore that with every ounce of vigor. And sure enough, you'll probably find a tunnel of gold underneath.
Wow, what a beautiful thing to be able to hide inspirational and, sort of like the lost wisdom of the ages and like all these details that people can then, like you said, look at just one aspect of them and be inspired to sort of dig deeper and maybe understand more. And, there's a lot of people who look at things like this and, there's a lot of sort of hatred for Masons in general and Christianity also. And so especially when you're combining these things and there's Masons building Christian cathedrals, then people might especially hate that. And so, what would you say to the people who are out here listening who are saying, why are we listening to somebody who's celebrating Masonic achievements or whatnot?
Well, I think there's a great deal of misconception about what what Freemasonry is. Is it a nefarious cabal trying to control world finance that puts its symbols on the back of the dollar bill that inspired the Illuminati and several other nefarious organizations? Partially, that is true, but I think Freemasonry has been given largely a bum rap. It's been given a bum rap by sensationalistic literature that demonizes it as being some institution of old white men that covet these secrets. Now, Freemasonry as a tradition had to covet its secrets for the following reason. If Freemasonry is an architectural guild, and so what would happen is that Freemasons were allowed to travel freely for the building of cathedral projects. Some of those would take hundreds of years. And the very steps that you have to take to building a medieval cathedral requires you to have a certain class of builder. You have a master of the works, a master of the craft, a fellow craft, and an apprentice. And each one of them would show up at a job site and they might say, okay, what are your credentials? How can we verify for certain that you are a fellow craft? You would be paid according to your grade. Now, if you proclaim to be a grade that you are not, you could be doing irreparable harm to the whole structure of the cathedral, so that 120 years later, the cathedral could fall in its own footprint because you profess to be something that you're not. So in order to protect those secrets and to protect how to build a cathedral, Freemasons adopted a form of secrecy with protecting their knowledge. It was in the same way that we follow secrecy in making sure that we don't send out the nuclear codes everywhere. For the Guild of Builders, this was a fully apprenticeship tradition. At a very young age, you would be at the cathedral site. You'd spend 20 years as an apprentice, simply cutting and hewing stone. You would later elevate to somebody who could place the stone. You could later elevate to somebody who could insert the keystone and actually understand the key forms of mathematics and geometry behind the cathedral. And that whole tradition required decades of knowledge. Now, what happened was that tradition of Freemasonic building had degenerated into inviting, for whatever reason, nobody knows why, members that knew nothing about architecture whatsoever. And it began to become a social club. So they began to invite members that were what in Masonic parlance scholarship is called operative, non-operative Masons. These were Masons that wanted to join a tradition that claimed to have its heritage in the building of King Solomon's Temple, the most important work of traditional architecture, Christian architecture, in fact, Judeo-Christian architecture. And then in the process of doing that, it began to become something else. It began to be involved in revolutionary activity. It began to be a political movement. And in Masonic lodges is where you would get the very battle cry, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the very notion that defines American identity. These ideas, in many senses, were forged in Masonic lodges where everybody, regardless of your rank, tradition, creed, level in society, what your employment was, your status whatsoever, you were all on the same level. And in Masonic lodges were some of the first times that people began to discuss ideas of the Enlightenment, ideas that we cherish today in modernity. And these were collected in Masonic lodges. And then later, it like all institutions, degenerated into many other different things to a tradition today that most Masons don't know why they repeat these words, what the tradition is about, and but the heritage of it is absolutely fascinating because it all relates to building. It's all about building, construction, building. And it's not about Shriners and good works, which of course it is too, today in its current guise. But I was really interested in the original ethos of Freemasonry, which was the building trade.
And it's fascinating that, those buildings that we're looking at we don't do that anymore, like nobody's doing that anymore. Maybe Freemasons are, and I just don't know about it, but it seems to me that that is almost like a lost art. And so if
It is.
Yeah. And
you nailed it.
And if
it's
there
exactly right.
And do you think that in Freemasonry they are actually keeping that aspect of their roots alive? Do you think that they're
no?
That's so sad, because I think
it is.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things that so enchanted me with the architect of the Manitoba Legislative Building is I would describe him as the last of the Mohicans, the last of an architectural tradition that believed that numbers, geometry, building, and architecture itself actually has a effect on our soul. That by walking into a beautiful cathedral like St. Finbar, it has some ontological effect on our feeling of hope, looking up to the heavens, sentiments of virtue. And what this dead tradition of architecture believed is because the very principles that they're using derive from the very principles of nature, the very forms that the creator uses in creating a snowflake are employed in cathedrals and other sacred buildings that follow Masonic principles. So that part of architecture is definitely, completely, totally lost. And most Masons aren't architects at all. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really sad. This idea of architecture as something that can affect you literally and physically and mentally and spiritually is something that is connected with this whole Tartaria and like the mud flood sort of idea that we used to have, this sort of, and whether you go for that or not, I like what comes out of that line of thought, which is that buildings were intended to do something besides just, house us and have a space for us to do whatever activities in, but that there was a higher sort of purpose for them. And it seems like that's the sort of idea that would have been more foundational at one point in a Masonic tradition and that is now lost. And so, not only are we losing this epically beautiful thing, but perhaps there's something that we're no longer able to access because we're no longer creating these structures that can do something that we no longer understand what they did.
I say amen to that. Yeah, certainly. We're increasingly seeing a world that is built entirely on financial means. Churches are largely big box stores with a pulpit. The architecture in general has degenerated into a form of brutalism and vainglorious worship of certain star architects, which is a first for the last 3,000 years of architecture. The people and the patron determined what the work would be. Today, we get architects that impose on us these structures that I think we all implicitly recognize as being hideous and totally out of place and extremely expensive with leaky roofs very quickly. I mean, a lot of these buildings don't last very long, and they're all basically a cult to the individual and not to the society at large. Most of these buildings that were built with stone for centuries still stand and are far more ecological than the ones that we build today with lead construction.
True, that is incredibly true. And even if you were going to build something out of like mud brick or something, I feel like we could do it a lot more beautifully than what we tend to do. So even if the materials you have at hand aren't necessarily stone and you don't know how to do stone cutting and these types of things, I think we could still do better than what we're doing. And it is really sad to see that even at the beginning of this century, or the last century, I had a house that I had owned that was built in 1901, and it was the most sturdy house that I had ever been in. And it was 15 years older, however, by the time I was standing in it. And now I'm in houses that are built in like the 70s, and they're, like you said, already falling apart and horrifying. And the 1900 one is going to fall apart too eventually, but like even in that amount of time we've degraded so much. And I just wonder if that's a reflection of our sort of age, like I always like to ask people what age they think we're in. If you're familiar with like the yugas and the idea of the golden age and the dark age, do you think that we're in a dark age and that is part of this reflection that we're seeing?
I architecturally speaking,
Yeah.
1000%. I think my former supervisor penned the most damning indictment on the modernist establishment of architecture. It's called The Age of Barbarism. I think it just recently came out. It's the author's name is James Stephen Curl, and he just slowly, one by one, shows how the so-called the folly of modern architecture and the proponents of it that impose this idea that the architect should reign supreme, and all of these social engineering experiments through just stripped down ugly buildings with parking lots on what are called pilotis. But so if any of your listeners are interested in that subject, I would look. It's called dystopia. Sorry, architectural dystopia. The very notion that architecture was supposed to bring about, as you put it, a way to make us feel better and a kind of utopic sense of pride. The architecture of today has done exactly the opposite.
Yeah. Well, and going back to the idea that, Masonic and Masonry used to be this guild that was protecting its secrets and its craft, and not in a nefarious way, but in a way that ensured that their craft and their products would have some integrity and last a while. Like that I can respect, and I can understand that perhaps there's a lot of infiltration and invasion and degradation that has gone on as well. But there's also this idea that people, when they enter into it, it's like you could be anyone, it could be me, it could be anyone who goes and, well, I guess it can't be me because it's Ben, but whatever. It could be any person who goes and decides to join a Masonic guild if they're invited or whatnot, and that you can kind of progress through it, and then at some point, and this is the idea, and I don't know if you can speak to this or not, but that people get to a point where they're sort of offered a choice of some kind, and it's like however they choose determines then sort of how they'll proceed in that structure. And so that there could be a way for them to be like pretty evil intentioned people kind of on one side of the Masonic structure, and then kind of like the people who aren't evil intentioned that chose the other way and are on the other side, and that they don't even necessarily know about each other or understand each other because they just know what they chose and then what happens afterwards. Do you think that there's any possible truth to that? Is that all conjecture, or can you speak to it at all?
I've seen zero evidence of that rooted into the structure of Freemasonry as an institution. Also, a sidebar: yes, there is co-Freemasonry and also a women's branch of Freemasonry too. One of the earliest Masonic initiates was actually a woman in Ireland. It's a remarkable story or fable, but and the idea that you progress through the grades and then eventually are provided with a choice, I have not seen that. What often gets touted as the kind of textbook of Freemasonry is this work by why am I blanking on him? Albert Pike. And Albert Pike wrote Morals and Dogma of Freemasonry, and he is American Freemason, but it gave birth to this notion that there were only 33 degrees and that you progress through these degrees, and it's only until you become the 33rd degree, well, actually there's only 32, and then the 33rd degree is honorary, that you're informed about the real intent of the institution. Yeah, all of that is not true. It's not like I'm some great exponent of Freemasonry. I have zero allegiance to the institution whatsoever.
Right.
I purely had an academic interest in it, in trying to understand how architects may have employed it in their works. But as along the way, I've learned that it has become such a subject of myth and fantasy and sensationalism, which has zero evidence in the record of Freemasonry. I mean, the same is true with the Illuminati, which was formed in 1776, was a sharp short-run student circle under the leadership of Adam Weishaupt. It lived for 8 years and then completely ended. There was no ongoing legacy of the Illuminati except for their institution of wanting to create a secular form of education that was divorced from the Roman Catholic Church. So if you're in any way which was totally, I mean, if you're in any way a proponent of public school education, you should give a nod of thankfulness to the original Bavarian Order of the Illuminati, because that was their essential goal.
Let's clarify public education as opposed to religious education, secular education, no matter what its form.
Oh yeah, right. Exactly. So the idea was that the church determined what were works that should be studied and considered true. And in the Enlightenment, we found out, well, actually, the geology of the Earth is much older, and we should be reading the French philosophic tradition. And there, works like Adam Smith and Helvetius and all the great philosophical thinkers of that time that promoted a separation of church and state. That the whole realm of inquiry into education was the prerogative of the church. And one part in busting that cabal was a small student-run circle called the Bavarian Order of the Illuminati that sought to disenfranchise them being together. But today, if for the most part, they're obviously treated as the all-seeing, the worst purveyors of trying to change our mind forever. I found no evidence in that either.
I think that, and I don't claim to know either, but I think it's interesting that the Illuminati and and Freemasonry has received so much attention and so much negativity, and perhaps there really is still an Illuminati. I don't necessarily think so. I think it's a catch-all term that has become popularized, and I think it's interesting to note that, because if there were a group, sort of a cabal or a nefarious organization that was the secretive, that was pulling the strings, and I think there could be and probably is, they would definitely want you to think that they're someone that they're not. And so it's interesting to wonder if it's a misdirection campaign to be looking down those rabbit holes instead of other rabbit holes. And I know you were on Freeman Fly's show, The Free Zone, and he likes to point out that his best guess of what that nefarious organization is actually the OTO, which I don't know enough about to comment on, but I know that there's people who are listening right now who are going to be sort of screaming and railing against, any possibility that Freemasonry is not evil. And I just like to throw out the possibility, because I'm not defending anyone or saying that we should wholeheartedly support anything. I'm just saying you gotta stay open-minded until you have a lot more evidence than I think most people do.
I'm with you there.
So I also wanted to point out that I personally would join any order. Maybe I shouldn't say that, but I think I would join any order that would give me access to the Vatican library. So I can also understand your motivation to seek
it's actually not that difficult to get access
to the Vatican libraries.
That is correct.
Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. How do I do it? Tell me how.
Well, you need an academic sponsor, and that's not very difficult either.
Well, that sounds pretty easy. I want to do it. I want to go see. Mm-hmm. Hopefully the coronavirus won't stop things like that from occurring.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, there's a beautiful painting in the Vatican Library. You would never expect it to be there, but there it is, of Hermes, who is there as the keeper of secrets, and also an entire body of tradition that is attributed to him for having written 40,000 works in his lifetime, the god of eloquence and knowledge and insight, very mercurial. But there he is, because at the time of the construction of the library, and definitely the paintings, I forget the name of the Italian artist, the notion that Hermes was a secondary, lesser divinity in the classical pantheon was considered untrue, but in fact Hermes was the Latin term is a prisca theologia. He was the most ancient philosopher, the original philosopher, the one by which even Moses and Abraham have their a genealogy to. And so there is Hermes in the Vatican Library. It might throw you off thinking, oh my gosh, there's this pagan messenger of the gods there in the library, and lo and behold, there he is.
Huh, that's fascinating. Well, I definitely want to go to the Vatican Library now that I know that I can just get in and study things. It's pretty awesome. But I know we should get to also Astana, because that is probably what a lot of people have been waiting for us to talk about. So you obviously did the, speaking of Hermes, the Hermetic sort of building of Manitoba's legislative building. So how did you then get into working with Astana and that?
My gosh.
What's called the Illuminati capital of the world.
Totally. So what happened was another completely sheer accident, impromptu connection to Kazakhstan. I was at this laptop maybe 5 years ago, and I was preparing this graduate course that I was teaching in the Department of Architecture on utopia, this whole effort to build paradise on Earth. And my course was called From Atlantis, Plato's fabled Atlantis, to Astana, the capital city of Kazakhstan. The only reason I chose Astana was because it is the latest planned capital, a capital planned from scratch with a tabula rasa and a master plan, like, for instance, Washington, D.C.
Right.
So that was how I was framing the class. Atlantis to Astana, it purely had that jibe to it. And as I was doing research on Astana, I kept finding myself encountering the same websites, which was Astana is the Illuminati capital of the world, Astana Freemasonry, and I wrote my dissertation on architecture and Freemasonry. Never heard of Astana and Freemasonry, so I was wondering why people were making this association. And as every single tab in my computer screen is reading Astana Illuminati, I get you can't make this up. It was this freaky. I get a call from the chief protocol officer of Manitoba, who, when foreign dignitaries come to the province, they'll invite me to give an architectural tour of the city. So at that moment, the protocol officer called me and said, "We would like." Are you available tomorrow to give a tour to the ambassador of Kazakhstan and his wife, who are, I know, in Winnipeg? And I said, Astana, Illuminati, Astana. So I jumped on it and said, on one condition, can we meet for breakfast first? So we did. And I very brashly, when I first met the ambassador, I extended my hand to him and said, "Sir, nice to meet you. I know what you're doing." And he said, "Okay, nice to meet you, Dr. Albo. What are we doing?" I said, "Well, your nation is doing what every other great nation has done since the dawn of time." And he said, "Okay, right. And what is that?" I said, "Well, you're using monumental architecture to announce you've arrived on the world stage." And he said, "Yes, that is what we're doing." I said, "But you're missing something." "Okay, what are we missing?" I said, "You need a foundation myth." And he said what you're probably thinking, which is, what is a foundation myth? And that's what began my study of Astana. If you look at, and I'll pause there, because if you look at Astana from the outside, you'll see some very strange features. You'll see a giant glass pyramid where the world religious leaders meet at the apex of a giant glass pyramid every 3 years to discuss religious tolerance and peace. I mean, if anything could sound more Illuminati than that, than a giant glass pyramid, and the apex of the pyramid is where religious leaders discuss to bring about a kind of global vision, a new world order of the ages. I mean, that's about it in architecture.
That's pretty
There is a giant UFO. There is the world's largest outdoor sphere. There is one building that is literally an all-seeing eye. It is a presidential library. So from the outside, and these two glistening golden towers, which have been perceived as being the two twin pillars of Yakin and Boaz, the two twin pillars in front of King Solomon's temple.
Yeah.
So on the outside, you're looking at this strange alien architecture, thinking it is full on 100% slam dunk Illuminati Freemasonry architecture.
Yeah.
But what I understood, and my inkling was at the time, is that in building a new capital, the chief architects were gleaning from, borrowing from a whole hereditary tradition of monumental architecture and building, and unknowingly were imbuing the capital with ideas that they themselves didn't even know the derivation of. And this became, when I first visited the capital, I had a rather executive visit from the state. I announced my interest in writing a book about the capital. I had zero financial interest in doing so. I just wanted to write I'll tell you why I said foundation myth in a moment. But when I first went there, I was brought to the architectural office of the master plan. It is a plan that they follow and have followed for the last 25 years to the T, including the distance between the curb height to the sidewalk for all climactic conditions that happen in Kazakhstan. The city cannot grow more than 3 million people. Perimetering the entire city is this massive a green belt of trees that they built around it, because of, historically speaking, cities that go beyond 3 million usually lead to squalor and urban sprawl and all these other problems that we have in the city today. So they wanted to solve all of that. So they would follow the master plan to a T. And there I am meeting the chief architects of the capital of Kazakhstan, knowing full well that none of them had ever heard of the Illuminati. And when I mentioned them, to the outside world, it looks like you are members of a secretive organization using architecture to become the new Washington, D.C. for a global capital. They laughed, of course. There's barely a Masonic lodge anywhere to be found in Kazakhstan. Huh. But what opened my eyes to it was that what I explained to them is that the tradition from which they're borrowing is the same way that we have been borrowing ideas from architecture that we don't know. We think we're just routinely copying, but behind it all are symbolic devices. Yeah. So, and that was actually being kind of, I don't want to be Jungian about it, that it's all in our collective unconscious, but in the creative building arts, especially architecture, architects crib from other architects all the time, spatially, formally, symbolically, and not knowing that they're drinking from this great well. And they require architectural historians to say, this is where you got these ideas. They started here, it generated there, it was imbued there, it is magnified here. So when I said that what you need is a foundation myth, is that what I was keen to do is basically subvert the Illuminati hypothesis, the notion that there was an Illuminati plot. I wanted to plant the seed of another idea, was that behind that is a superficial reading of the capital. Architecture does have a profound symbolic impact on our lives. And if you can read that deeper language, then you could see what's really going on. So in order to create this foundation myth, I wanted to look at the whole of the country, and in particular this area, why they built it there and whatnot. And that laid the seeds of what became my foundation myth. So what is it? I'll tell you, is that a foundation myth has been used since the dawn of time to create a new order of things. The whole story of Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome, is a foundation myth. The whole story of the Exodus myth of the Jews, Exodus out of Egypt, there's no archaeological evidence yet. We believe that this is the foundation by which all Jewish identity emerges. And even America, there's a foundation myth. It's called manifest destiny, that by divine providence, there was meant to be a full-scale slaughter of indigenous peoples and an occupation of the West, because it was decreed from on high, having escaped the tyranny of Europe, that this new land, this new world, this new Jerusalem, this new city on the hill was bestowed. And with it being bestowed by providence, we had to occupy the West. That is a complete foundation myth. We know when it was created, who started it, but that planted a seed. I mean, let's make America great is another type of foundation myth. So myths have a huge impact, and architecture is a great vehicle in which to motivate them. So what I wanted to do was invent a myth, let people know I was fully inventing this myth. I wasn't trying to pull the wool over anyone's eyes. I was saying right from the outset, I'm going to create a myth. And I'm going to create a myth using the very criteria that myths have been created from the dawn of time. And even though I've told you, like an illusionist can tell you, this is how I did the card trick, you're still bedazzled because you're going, I'm still fooled. How did you find the ace? And so what I wanted to do was kind of not bamboozle anyone, but give you an insider track on how to create a myth and how what the ingredients and architecture are. And then I wanted to let people loose on what I believed was underneath the myth. I don't reveal it I don't disclose that part of it. Instead, I hid a solution to the myth inside the book. Somewhere in the book, in its pages, its cryptograms, it's everywhere you want to look. Turn it upside down, inside and out, whatnot. There is a hyper level story, and I want to invite people into that story. And once that solution becomes known, and I will never disclose it, and of course there's a prize to it, but that was really just to get people to engage in what it is to be a mythographer and myth making. I wanted to not create a form of disruption, but overturn the Illuminati thesis on its head and show you that it's much, much deeper than that. And in order to do that, you have to put a little kind of seed of a mystery. You plant that little seed of a mystery and let people look very carefully at it. And sure enough, you will find eventually the astute observer will find a dodge. They'll find an angel holding a measuring rod, a sphinx, a something. And if you follow that thread deeper and deeper, therein lies what the whole of the book is about. It is not a superficial story about a foreign capital. Why should we be interested in Kazakhstan? It's not simply about architecture. It is a much deeper experiment.
Wow. So this is, any of the people listening to this could go read this book and look for that dodge and find the key and unlock something. And then you have like an offer connected with this, right?
Yeah. So basically it goes like this. And it's an unambiguous solution. It's not like you could have it partially right. It's like you can only have it 100% right. It's not up for any ambiguity. And this is what I will reward you. A $5,000 US, 2 first-class tickets to travel from where you are to Astana, the capital city of Kazakhstan. And there in the Illuminati capital of the world, you will spend 7 nights in the most remarkable 5-star hotel overlooking the most extraordinary architectural building campaign since Augustus's Rome. Nothing, not even Dubai, not Brasilia, not even the Washington, D.C. comes close to the myth making that is in those buildings and what's happening there. Like take the central building, which is the very apex, the axis mundi of the entire master plan of Astana, is a building called the Baiteric Tower. And the Baiteric Tower is a tree. It's called the Tree of Life. And in the Tree of Life is this massive sphere, this golden sphere, which represents the sun. And it represents an ancient story, a story you would never expect to be in Kazakhstan, and yet it is. It is a reconstruction of the oldest myth that was ever written, which is the Sumerian tale of Etana. And the Sumerian tale of Etana tells the story of a young hero who ascends on the back of an eagle and rescues the eagle, and in return is basically given the keys to the order of creation. And if you read the very first lines of Etana, it basically describes exactly what is happening in the latest planned capital in Kazakhstan. And here's the freaky bit. I did not expect this to be there, and yet it is. And this is the power of dealing with myth, is sometimes you realize I am a participant in the myth, and other times you find that the myth is much bigger than you. It's a matrix, as it were. And so is that the eagle permeates the entire capital city. There are eagles in the United States. There are eagles in very basis of Rome, Persia. We've long used the eagle as an implement of civilization. It's an interesting question. But this capital city is replete with the eagle. The eagle is everywhere. The whole plan of the entire capital is based on an eagle. And that is the whole Sumerian tale of Etana is also based on an eagle and a hero's quest as to working with the eagle. So my hero's quest is to say that hidden in the architecture of Astana is a solution to the three greatest threats of our time. I did not include biological warfare or viruses, but I included these three. One is the proliferation of nuclear weapons. The second is religious extremism. And the third is planetary sustainability. And beneath the blueprint of Astana, the buildings themselves are characters in this mega myth that is seeking to achieve those three agendas. But, as I mentioned earlier, that is just the superficial layer of the myth. It's where I got this idea from was from none other than J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. So what they did was, in the 1930s and 40s, they formed a literary circle in Oxford called the Oxford Inklings. They met at a pub called the Eagle and Child. That's a clue, by the way. Funny that they meet in a pub that is the very basis of the Etana myth. An eagle hero, a child, and an eagle. And there they meet in this pub, and they're drinking beers, and they're the greatest literary writers of the whole of the 20th century and far before that. And they realize that the First World War and the Second World War can be ameliorated. The whole of the 20th century is not suffering from Stalin and dictators and tyrannical regimes. They are suffering from three things: disenchantment, enemy, and the destruction of traditional norms. And so what they realize is the only way to combat these three great traumas is to write myth. Is to write myth that on the surface, people think that The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is all about a quest, or that The Lord of the Rings is about a quest. But we know now from Tolkien scholarship that the whole of the Tolkien works is him imposing on the reader the notion that myth is greater than reality. And the imagination is the vehicle by which we can make this world a better place. And the rest of it is Roman Catholic theology. He was deeply Roman Catholic. So he convinces, through many beers at the Eagle and Child pub in Oxford, C.S. Lewis, who is an ardent atheist, to say, you are completely missing the boat. Myth is the vehicle of changing the world. And they had many, many battles about it. So in the end, he writes Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and the 7 epics of the Chronicles of Narnia. What C.S. Lewis was actually doing in the Chronicles of Narnia is giving you a superficial story of a hero's quest. But behind it, and we only recently discovered this, here was his hidden dodge, is that the 7 books are actually commentaries on the 7 planets of medieval cosmology. I had the great fortune of writing my dissertation with someone who loved writing their dissertation. We were at the same college at Cambridge, called Peterhouse, Michael Ward. He was a theologian who loved writing his thesis, and I hated it because I went through, writing a thesis is tough work.
Yeah.
And he ended up writing the book called Planet Narnia. That's actually, your listeners should buy this book during this epidemic. You want to read a great book, read Planet Narnia.
Yeah.
And what he shows empirically is that C.S. Lewis, the great medievalist, that's what he was, realized that what we were missing in this age was something that the medieval world had, which was the belief that the stars of heaven, the 7 planets of medieval cosmology, which include the sun and the moon, have virtues. And today we're totally disconnected from them. And there's a way of drawing down, gleaning those virtues. But he didn't want to ram it down our throat like a form of catechism. Instead, they are throughout the series. So take the work, the Prince Caspian. I think that's the first of the works. The whole of that book and the Chronicles of Narnia is all a commentary on the moon. Moon theology. That's what you're getting. The Lion, Witch, and Wardrobe is all about the sun. Sun, solar power, justice, solar power. And realizing that this is what they were doing, and realizing, at least for them, that the greatest threat of their time was disenchantment. And in order to combat that, we need to re-enchant people. I thought, holy shit, is there a similar trauma we're facing in the 21st century? And if there is, could I write something like they did, which was a myth embedded within a myth, and get the people that read it to participate in this myth, but tell them that I'm doing it.
Yeah.
Basically saying, here's what I'm doing. And I want you to participate in making the world a better place by following the threads, reading between the lines, go way beyond the superficial reading of the Illuminati. Read what is the intention of, you don't know yet. You're just meant to follow the signs. And so that's what I've set out to do with this work. I will never disclose what the hidden message is, but what I'll tell you is this. It is a very powerful form of disruption. Let's look at it in this sense. How is it that today the whole world is amidst total, utter chaos, financial collapse, rampant fear based on a simple idea, which is the fear that some foreign-born virus in a wet market in China has created this worldwide pandemic? Now, the fact is, it is decidedly true. There is this virus that has all of those dire consequences. But what I'm interested in is the idea, why people are hoarding toilet paper and everything else. It is the most powerful thing that we have, an idea. And the idea that is really percolating throughout this all is mortality and fear.
Yeah.
So I thought, shit, can you subvert that? And so I did it a different way. My hope is that we can create the world a better place by making sure that there is denuclearization, that we treat the planet as a major core part of all of our decisions, and that we just certainly do away with or ameliorate religious violence and extremism. That's part of the quest, but that is not the whole quest. That the quest is basically, and here is another clue, is if you can plant the seed of a mystery in the public mind, in the public conscience, and lead a series of clues to finding that mystery, that has always been the most powerful way to galvanize social identity. You might call it a hoax. You might say, oh, you're hoaxing us. This is, some little sleight of hand business. But the Rosicrucians did the same thing 400 years ago, and we're still talking about them today. They invented a myth that in the height of the European war, that in the fight between Catholics and Protestants, the most bloody period of the 30 Years' War was during that time, an unknown group announced that a mysterious brotherhood was all around us, and they had access to a mystical body of secret knowledge that would bring together science and faith. That alone created so many different works of art, architecture, ingenuity, and it was all based on a complete fiction. There was no Rosicrucian Brotherhood. They did not exist. They invented this idea. I don't know. Do I believe today that Valentin Andre, the writer of the Rosicrucian Manifestos, had this in mind? I don't know. But what he did do was he inspired people like Robert Flood, Paracelsus, and many other writers of the Western mystery tradition to make huge strides in our investigation into science. And largely because of the idea, in my estimation, that there already existed this science. It was already out there. And if you wanted to join the Brotherhood, they would find you. So continue on your path. And that was a very hopeful message. So I thought, in today's age, is there a way of doing a similar hopeful message and at the same time revealing that I'm actually doing it?
I love that. I think you're absolutely right that that is the way to capture people's imaginations and motivate them to, discover more and learn more. And, if they're trying to uncover these secrets that are, especially if they're layered into this mythology you've created and have hints that are of probably, I'm guessing, various sort of disciplines, then people have to then sort of study all of those things as well. And I think that that's a fun endeavor, no matter your sort of belief system or whatnot. And I always like to point out that these things are, especially when you get into symbology and symbolism, there's always multiple ways to take something or look at something. And it's almost like a tool. Like it can be used for multiple purposes, some good, some bad. And so really it comes down to like the user or the person interpreting and what they're going to do with it to determine the sort of quality of it. And so I want to drop that idea in here too, but I want to clarify hold
on. I have to follow up there because that was so beautifully stated. Thank you. That is exactly what I am setting out to do, is to give you this very powerful a tool shed of a symbolic research and symbolism, which, as you said, are multivalent, and send each individual on a quest. Yeah. That's it.
That's beautiful. That's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful goal. And I love that people are going to get involved in this. And I want to say again, if anybody out there is like, this person's a Freemason and they're supporting the New World Order, I have no evidence of that, but you could still look into this and see what it's about, and whether you're for it or against it, you would probably learn a lot. And whether it's more, dynamite for you to like throw at people, or whether it's, some gold to inspire your mind or your heart or whatever, then that'll be kind of up to you. But either way, it'd be an interesting endeavor. And I want to go back to the idea of you creating this myth in the first place. You did that. That was your completely your own impetus. It wasn't. They didn't come to you and say, "Will you do this for our city and create this for us?"
No. Okay. Yeah. No. It was. I when I began to explore the capital and realizing the rich architectural tradition that was there, even though it was using in many cases modern architecture, I thought, what a perfect chalkboard to create a hieroglyph. That was it.
Yes, I can see that. It's fascinating to me, like you said, that anybody could come up with this city and these plans and create this without having connected it to these, like you were saying earlier, like the Illuminati or these sorts of things. But I also then go back to my own understanding, which is that there's truth in nature, and everything sort of stems from that, and geometry stems from that, and all of our understandings sort of stem from that. And so it's not actually that weird that you could come to the same sort of point on many paths. But it's pretty fascinating still.
Geometry plays a huge role in this work, and in particular, what's even fascinating is that school kids in Astana learn trigonometry and different forms of geometrical math, and spatial awareness, pi, a squared plus b squared equals c squared, by studying the buildings in their capital. How cool is that?
That's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, it was, in that sense, it is above Plato's Academy, the first academic, let's call it university. There was a phrase that was written, let no one enter lest he know geometry. And it was his way of saying, this is your prerequisite of being a member of the academy. And that notion comes full circle in the capital city, where so much formal geometry is laid in the plan and the elevation of the buildings. And when you're playing with that rich body of symbolism, oh man, I mean, that's it. That's the stuff of life right there.
That's pretty cool. I myself have a goal to get better at geometry. It was something that I had I was very lucky to have very good geometry teachers, specifically in math, and they incited me to love it. So it'd be cool. And I keep having these things pop up in life where specifically geometers are doing these amazing things that capture my imagination. So I myself want to look deeper into that study. But speaking of imagination and how powerful that is, and especially like you were saying with the coronavirus, and this is, toppling sort of the world structure and the way we do things, seemingly, and all of it, so far is mostly in our heads. It's just the idea of that, the imagination of that. And I'd like to hear more about your idea of what's going on with this virus and how it's affecting the world.
Oh my gosh. We've become so all consumed by it, and now it's gone into fever pitch, because it's, and we demonize so many players as part of it. I mean, there is, to me, the one thing that I was able to glean from this was how ephemeral our financial system is, and our institutions that are seemingly central to our identity, brought to their knees by whim and a whiff of fear. It's
right.
Crazy.
It's crazy.
I mean, it's surreal to think how rapid it's gone to that. I mean, I have a number of colleagues that live and work in China, and their news obviously totally sanitized, as is our own, on the subject. We just don't have access to. I mean, I think misinformation and disinformation is far more contagious than the virus in this case.
Yeah, it's been pretty interesting to see wild theories going around, and yet there is a lot of questions to be asked, like this biological lab that's in China that has, perhaps let this virus out, and was it planned or not? And then now China is saying that the United States actually came and brought the virus there and let it loose, and all of these things. It's fascinating.
Have you followed? Spot on. Have you followed that Dean Koontz thread?
Yes. Well, and so now I'm seeing this post that comes up over and over again, which has the Dean Koontz book and the Wuhan part like sort of circled, and then right next to it, without explanation that it's a totally different book, it has the Sylvia Browne prediction that in 2020 there would be like a lung disease that sort of spreads around the world. And no one is pointing out that that's actually two different books and two different authors and two different things. And I'm always like pointing out, like, well, actually one of those is Dean Koontz's, one is Sylvia, and people are like, what, you don't see how crazy it is? I'm like, no, it's crazy. I'm just pointing out these are two different sources. Let's just keep our information as clear as we can.
No. I've had to field so many student inquiries and others on that. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
I mean, and it is weird. And then people are saying, this is planned. Sylvia Browne was a plant. She knew back then what they were planning, and this was their way of telling the world. And I'm like, could be she's kind of psychic. Could be she picked that up out of the ether. There's a lot of predictions she made. There's bound to be some that are true. She may actually be gifted in this. I don't actually know that much about her. But I just think
nor do I.
I try not to jump to conclusions, because it could be a lot of things, and I'm not sure which, and I'm not sure that it matters specifically what Sylvia Browne knew or didn't know. But it is interesting. It's fascinating to me, but it's like a lot of things there's it seems like there tends to be sort of ripples that kind of go back in time and that people can pick up on them, whether they're gifted or not. And I always use the example of 9/11. Before it happened, there's a dramatic uptick in like dreams of, related incidents and artwork that seemed related. And then now people can look back and say, well, those people all knew. And it's like, no, they didn't all know. Maybe somebody knew it was going to happen, but the majority of people that you see having these sort of things occur, especially in their art, I would tend to think that they're more picking up on the sort of emotional ripple that might go out in all dimensions or directions, and that's kind of amazing in its own right, and we should be amazed by it and think about it, but not necessarily as a, pointing fingers at this person and saying that they definitely are in the Illuminati or whatever.
To go back to the myth hypothesis, is that is in the Hermetic tradition. There are scholars of the Hermetic tradition have identified what are called like 6 fundamental forms of thought that define Hermeticism. Okay, and these different elements are a way of describing what is at the core of this very amorphous description of what Hermeticism is. Best description has been by a Dutch scholar who says that on the large part, we could identify Western civilization as these 2 big trunks, two big central columns: biblical faith and Greek rational philosophy, which led to empirical science. And in between those two is another hidden a subterranean stream called the Hermetic tradition. And this Hermetic tradition delves with notions of symbolism, alchemy, Kabbalah, secretive orders, numerology, the occult. And but that one of the cornerstones behind this third pillar has been the role of the imagination from the earliest of the Hermetic writings, purportedly 2nd century CE, to New Age literature of today. The power of the emotive power of imagination to bring about creation is at the heart of it. Is that imagination isn't just a faculty of the senses or the mind, but it is a divine spark. It is a way in which we can take this one ingredient that we have, our intellect, the most potent thing that we have, and the highest part of that, our intellect, our imagination, is really what can change the world, find new protons, enable rockets to go into outer space, discover black holes, understand singularity mathematics. So there is, going back to something you mentioned earlier, a dark side to that too. And one of the dark sides to the role of the imagination is that fear base that I think that we're living in so powerfully right now. But the glue of them both is the role of the imagination.
Yeah. It's like a generative principle, but it's also like a enlightening principle, like takes the shadows away and allows you to sort of discover.
Yeah, I mean, when I was after I published Astana, and it was in circulation, my publisher called me the next day and said, we sold out the first edition in one day.
Wow.
And it was largely because of the puzzle. And I'll mention, I did not have the puzzle in mind until later. It was like an epiphany. I'd written the book without the puzzle, and very quickly called my publisher before it went to press and said, stop the presses. I have to change it entirely. I have to put in this hidden message. We end up doing it. So it does very well the first day. And right after, my publisher said, we need a new book on the myth. We need another myth book. And my interest at that time was the myth of Satoshi Nakamoto.
I've heard this myth.
The myth of Satoshi Nakamoto, which is the pseudonymous founder of Bitcoin and creator of Bitcoin. We don't know who this person is, but I think this cryptocurrency, this is the very reason that, or is going to be the solution that comes out of this this global problem that we're living in. A new digital economy based on a cryptographic digital asset that, you know, I personally, I mine Bitcoin. I'm really bullish on Bitcoin, but I only became so after realizing that we know nothing about its creator. We only have this manifesto, the 9-page paper called the white paper, Bitcoin white paper. And it was created right after the financial collapse. And it was meant to be a solution against all of these global problems. And what I was so intrigued by, and I ended up not writing that book, doing something else, is that even the currency of the future is based on a myth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating. That, you know, that guy is got songs dedicated to him if he's ever a guy. My idea is that it's possibly a, what am I trying to say? A creation of AI that we didn't even realize was sentient enough to do something like that, and that it placed it in, you know, the right place at the right time to become a thing, and is now promoting it. Perhaps it's even like feeding that AI is building its sort of infrastructure around the world, or whatever. Because it's pretty ingenious. So I mean, maybe.
Oh my God, it's brilliant. I mean, when I first was setting out to write this book, I was planning on debunking it. I was like, oh my God, this is a total fraud. Mm-hmm. This is a fraud, like the Illuminati thesis is a fraud, and the Freemasons controlling the world is a fraud. Oh my God, let me at it. This won't take very long. And I went to the first Bitcoin forums where Satoshi is posting in the Bitcoin forums, and from what I could tell linguistically, is that it is a single author. They were, he or she was trained in the Commonwealth. There's a usage of language that, and very quickly from post to post, that could not have been somebody trying to sound like they were Japanese or American. The spellings tell you a lot about the individual. And as I was, digging around this well, it wasn't until I actually read, as you put it, the AI manifesto, the white paper. It's a 9-page document. The whole of Bitcoin can be explained in a 9-page document called the white paper. Or maybe it's 10 or 12 pages. It has a small number of citations at the end. Anybody could read it. It is, and it's not until I read it front to back that I realized this is not a fraud. This makes perfect financial, fiduciary sense, transactional sense, peer-to-peer transactions in the digital age. But there was one line in particular that when I read it, it was like a burning bush moment for me, a come to Jesus moment, because I think it's on the first page, the third paragraph. I recommend your listeners go to the Bitcoin white paper, and it describes that the financial system of the future will not be based on centralization and trust, which is what our system is based on today. Centralized bank, the Federal Reserve, totally centralized, and trust. We have to trust them. It's not backed by anything. It's not backed by gold, no assets. It's all based in godly trust. Now it's the American, Canadian, wherever taxpayer. The financial system in the future will not be based on centralization and trust, but instead decentralization and mathematical proof. And that, in that one sentence, that is the whole of Bitcoin. You can understand Bitcoin from just understanding that one statement. The whole of the blockchain, the whole of Bitcoin is based on a decentralized distributed ledger, which everyone has access to every single transaction from the first to the last ones of seconds ago. And no one could corrupt the system because it was not based on trust. It was based on math and, funnily enough, a great deal of geometry.
It's fascinating. That's the part about it that I love. I love that the decentralization part. I love that it takes the power away from central bankers.
Oh, totally. They're
and-
the far more nefarious than any Illuminati or virus there ever was.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of what I was trying to say earlier. Of like, well, you know, those people are happy if we're chasing rabbit holes that they know lead not back to them, and that's part of why we might want to question some of the narratives, especially in an alternative community that we generally tend to take as sort of gospel and don't look further.
Yeah.
And I'm a very anti-AI sort of person. I have a huge mistrust of AI and robots in general, and and so I know I'm very biased. And so even, as much as I love the concept of Bitcoin and the decentralization factor and the taking the power away from central bankers and this sort of thing, I still don't have any. And I've always I'm always on the fence of like, am I going to ever get some, or am I just going to sit here and hate it for no reason?
Yeah. No. I understand completely how you feel.
I'm like,
I mean, there are, yeah.
I'm going to go move in with the Amish someday or something.
That's not so bad.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, that's
one way of doing it.
That's one way of doing it, and there's nobility in it.
True. Yes. I appreciate many things about their culture. So yeah, I try not to rail against it because I appreciate a lot of things about it, but I myself have never delved into it. And I have a lot of friends who are like, you have to get some, you have to, especially like, you know, in the next collapse, which might be soon.
Yeah, which might be soon, totally.
Right.
I mean, the Fed just printed $1.5 trillion and they lowered the interest rates to 0. Like, if that doesn't let you know the whole financial system is a fraud,
yeah,
you know, come on. You could cook the books by just flipping a switch, and next thing you know, a bunch of central banks and member banks have ones and zeros on their computer screen, and that's suddenly the ledger in which we determines life and death. No way.
Yeah.
That come on, no chance.
Which goes back to that idea that imagination is that powerful, that we imagine
there
this
you
has
go.
value, and so it does.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, most certainly. Did on the AI front, I forget the name of this author who he wrote a proof paper. He was and you probably know this.
Is it
a number of years ago?
Kurzweil?
What
Was it Kurzweil?
was he writes 3 hypotheses that lead to the determination of AI. Each one of them.
Turing?
One of them is true. No, it's not Turing.
Oh.
And it was very recently. It was maybe in the last 10 years. So he was an expert in computer science and something else. And I think, and I could be botching this, but there are 3 postulates, one of which he purportedly claims is true. He just doesn't know which one is true. One of these 3 statements is true. Number 1, that AI is inevitable. Number 2, AI is inevitable and will have 0 interest in the progeny of the human race. Number 3, AI is inevitable and we all are already living in an AI manufactured universe without knowing. One of them is true. He just doesn't know which one. There was another. I think it's. Do you know who it is?
I think it's Kurzweil. I'm not sure though.
Okay.
Kurzweil is like the main sort of thinker on these things. But I can't.
If you could send it to me by email or however. Yeah. I'd be thrilled to know more.
Ray Kurzweil, I think is who it is. But yeah, I agree that one of those things is probably true. I hope that, and that's why I'm saying I'm not 100, as much as people who have listened to me a long time wouldn't necessarily believe this, I'm not 100% set on AI being absolutely evil. I just tend to believe that it most likely is.
I mean,
and evil is not really the right word, but the second postulate that it doesn't care about us.
You must have seen that film Ex Machina, or some people call it Ex Machina.
I don't think I have.
Where have you?
I don't think so.
Oh my God, that's your quarantine special for this evening, which covers exactly the being on the fence as you are about AI, but also seeing it as a major threat. Yes. You'll love this film. Beautifully shot,
awesome.
with a deep I think, a moral lesson in there too.
Ooh, I'll love it. Yeah, I know it's been on my list actually because it's familiar, but I'm really bad at watching movies. But yeah, now that we might have 2 weeks to a month locked in our houses, then maybe
Indeed.
I'll have plenty of time to watch more things.
Well, that should increase your subscription.
Yes, I hope so.
Yeah,
Well,
that'd be
so
good.
I have some questions that are a bit more broad, but they definitely relate to most of the things we've been talking about as we sort of start to wind down the show. And one of them is I'm wondering what your take is on what do you think the sort of weakest and most destructive aspects of society are?
Ooh, um, that's very good. I think too. Um, the the size of government and the current financial banking system.
Nice. Smaller government is better and decentralization is better.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I think that in government should have very small footprint in our daily life that relates to roads, post office,
Infrastructure.
and hospitals, pure infrastructure.
Agreed.
Everywhere else, it's a huge misstep.
So people who are still listening and earlier thought maybe you were evil because you're a Mason by academic
Was a Mason
by academic choice and not for any other reason. Hopefully, just heard you say that because I think that is something we can all get behind on this show.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that's great.
I would hope that we all acknowledge that the idea we have in our heads of the Illuminati or whatever we want to call them, whatever name we want to give them, they want more centralization and less freedom for us, and definitely more control, which would necessitate larger government. So,
well,
sort of
put this in perspective. Is I don't know whether it's true, but I think the analogy works. Where if you put a frog in a boiling pot of water and immediately jumps out, but if you slowly cook it, then there it shall remain. And in many senses, I think this has been the burden of taxation in large government for us. Because if you were to take a time warp and go back to imperial times at the height of the Roman Empire under Caesar, and I would ask you the question, would you rather pay taxes under the rule of Caesar or in present day society today? I think most people would say by far I would not want to live in Caesar's Rome and pay taxes at that time. They must have been brutish. But that would be a huge mistake.
Huh.
At the time of the Roman Empire, you would have to pay for taxation for the whole year 2 days' wages. That was it. And for that, you got, that's it.
Wow.
And, oh yeah, I know. And most of the revolts, I believe I think it's even in Genesis, the reason that there is a revolt in Egypt is because the slaves find themselves being taxed at 40% of their worth in terms of production. And I live in Canada. We're at like 55%.
Yeah, we're slaves.
It's nuts. It's ridiculous.
That's crazy. I had no idea. Yeah. I'd heard that not even that long ago, the amount that we would pay versus our salaries, let's say, would be equivalent to, I can't remember, but it was something similar. It's like 2 days of wages would pay for our entire health insurance and any other insurance that we had and keep us in good health and safe from, fire or disaster or whatever. And now it's obviously a lot more than that as well. So no wonder everything's so difficult. So then what would you think are the sort of strongest and best aspects of our society?
Hope and human perseverance.
Especially right now.
Mm-hmm.
I really am trying to encourage people to remember that no matter what happens, we are human beings and we have each other, and we can only do the best we can do. But if we just give up and start screaming and like lose our minds, then we're never going to get anywhere. So, we got to face what's happening with some hope and some perseverance. So I like that. And what sustains you and keeps you sort of going down your path that you're traveling and bringing these ideas to people?
Discovery. The the quest of discovery is at least for me, what drives all my activity is that we know such a fraction of the great mystery, and every now and then we are, there are veiled signs all around us waiting to be decoded. And if I could play a small part in some of that unveiling and the discovery of it, that's a life well lived.
That's a beautiful thing. And where can people find more from you or learn more about your book, get your book, maybe connect with you? Where would you want to
Yeah, sure. Well, I have two websites now. One is frankalbo.com. I think my class list and some publications. I'm working on a new book right now, which I'm really pumped about. And my other website is called Astana Myth, and I would direct people who are interested in the Astana book to go there, because it's there's a lot of clues going on in there. There are a couple of videos. Please watch those, and it'll give you an entree as to what the book is about. And if you're interested, then go to Amazon. You contact me directly. I believe I have my personal contact list there. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I was just showing people that as you were describing it, so they could get a taste and hopefully go find more from you. And so what are your final words of wisdom that you want to leave people with as they're leaving the show and going into their hopefully not quarantine, but possibly quarantined areas?
Don't worry, be happy.
It's short and sweet. I love it. There's people who are criticizing me and others lately for being like too hopeful and too happy, and they're saying it's not realistic. And I keep trying to go back to, like, no matter what's happening, your one thing that you can do about it is your mental and your emotional state about it. So why not have some hope and some happiness?
You basically paraphrased my hero, which is the Roman Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who was a slave during the Roman Empire. He wrote and penned the greatest work of philosophy, in my estimation. I mean, it's collected in a book called The Art of Living, and that is the backbone of Epictetus, who actually won his freedom through his philosophy. Is that you are only in control of your thoughts and your actions. So that don't perjure your soul, and every day you're going to have trouble and hardship. And during my own hardship, I had Epictetus, this very thin volume of Epictetus, beside me at my nightstand. And when things were grim and ugly, I just flipped open, read one of these beautiful, pristine words from 2,000 years ago, and realized, man, if a slave in Rome could live by this credo, then with all of that I have around me, this should be a walk in the park.
Amen. Beautiful. Well, fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog, electric, concentric dose of wisdom, according to Frank Albo. Frank, it has been a pleasure. Thank you so much for sharing with us tonight.
It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Absolutely. Multifaceted is every instant of life and every phenomenon therein, and we cannot know a thing until we know every aspect of a thing. We can, however, use discernment to know our current understandings, emotional responses, and intuition about every aspect of everything, and as long as we reserve the right to update those judgments as more information comes in, there is nothing wrong with that. Always be willing to sit with what presents itself long enough to see if there is more information to take in, but never forget your intuition serves you well. And until you have perfected your perspective, my friends, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first. Mwah.
It's a one-on-one lesson, so do your homework. Make your dome hurt while up on earth. My bones are blessed from holy dirt. Vibes manifested to words that told me search for verbs and adjectives to describe birth. Worth more than one can speak, while the tongue beats a weak, a sour taste in your mouth, bittersweet. Words can also kill you when you sleep. Mind condition, low frequencies while the subconscious mind listens. I can tell a vision filled with lies disguised as truth, and spread it like the word to the youth. Watch the tube. A place where the god was booed is sorcery. To recreate a god forgery does more than meets the eye. Not too many know. Just hear me flow like the eye of Horus Penny, yo. Yeah, not ready to leave until we believe we're free to go. You hear me?
Run.
Sculpted from the ether, the material will eat ya. Stuck on this plane, lanes use jet fuel to greet ya. The dimensional 3 ain't beating me on top of the 4th. Didn't climb Jacob's ladder to squab with a sword. Forged with ink drizzle, branched out. Try quiet your lamps now. Ascension past the matter, let they slam out they damn mouths. We ain't on land now, but they understand. Sacrificing wisdom, hoarding dumber, kosher, wicked hands. Putting faith in worthless worship of the mortals. Artificial portals, mass ingestion of the black goo. Bioengineered morsels, conversing with machine elves. Bypassing baggage, they stuck on Android screens now. I'm scrolling emerald tablets, Moloch living lavish. Off the backs of the savage, them clasped hands at the Sabbath. Smack of energy damage, they done twisted the tongues. But nanotech in the lungs, the awakening's begun. All they really can do is fucking
Run.